Hey, thanks for stopping by the channel. Make sure that you are subscribed and that you are checking out the bell icon that's down there and making sure that you're getting notifications when my video content drops. I'm in vacation mode of sorts, if you will. You can see that right here. I thought I'd share that with you. It's May 4th, and I am going to be doing a lot of yard work today. And I wanted to get this done before I decided to go out and sully myself with the soil of the earth. It's Minnesota. It's May. 2 days ago, we had 85 degrees, and today it is 50. And why do I bring that up? Well, because it kind of ties into the launching of a new series here on the Minnesota Black Robe Regiment channel. And that series is going to be about Saul Alinsky. I've been promising this for quite some time, but now more than ever, it's vitally important to talk about it. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be working through Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. And I'm going to also be talking about Saul himself and a little bit of what he was all about and what he was trying to accomplish. And unlike my brief series on Joseph McCarthy, what he got wrong and what he got right, the fact that he was a little bit of a hero, if the Americans of today would just take some time to recognize him and get to know that a little bit about him, we're going to be talking about Saul Alinsky strictly as public enemy number one of the United States throughout his adult and meaningful life. He was an evil man. He was a rotten man. And people that follow him and practice his rules, even if they don't know it, are evil, rotten people. Some of them by default, some of them by personal choice. But be that as it may, we're going to be talking about Saul for several videos, maybe a different video for every one of his rules, maybe several of his rules all rolled into one, but we are definitely going to be talking about it. So I'm going to do the strange thing today, and I'm going to start off with a single rule instead of talking about Saul's life and background. And I'm going to talk about how it's being used today and how it's being used very effectively. See, Saul was a Marxist. He was a Gramscian theorist. A Gramscian Marxist. He despised everything that America was. He despised everything about constitutional republic. He despised the American framework and the American way of life. And his entire goal was to flip the script on the United States and turn it into a Marxist country. And everybody can laugh at me and say, well, gee, that's a little bit of an overreaction to a single man. But you keep in mind that Alinsky never once got hauled in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He never made it into a McCarthy hearing, yet he was active at that time, and he had actual links to communist Marxist organizations. That's how dangerous he was. He kind of flitted under the radar of the conservative constitutionalist and the traditionalist right of the United States of the day that he was alive. And if he could escape that kind of scrutiny from people who were hunting for it, that just shows you how markedly dangerous he was and how markedly dangerous his philosophy and his worldview continues to be. So what about his rules? And which rule are we going to be talking about today? Well, we're going to be talking about his rule, and some people have broke his rules down to 12 or 13. So we're going to just call this his last rule that he posited for his followers, for his disciples, his acolytes. And that was pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. And the kind of the definition of that is cut off the support network and isolate the target from sympathy. Go after the people and not institutions. People hurt faster than institutions. Now, why is that so important? Well, here's why. We see this happening continuously today. There are a few people going after some institutions and organizations for wrongthink today. Like we have seen Parler is not an individual. Parler was a corporation, for lack of better terminology, and they went after Parler. But they did something particularly egregious, and they also went after the CEO of Parler. And that the CEO of Parler was so fundamentally scrutinized and in the spotlight of the Marxist left of the United States. And notice I didn't say radical Marxist left, because the Marxist left is by nature radical. But these Marxist leftists in the United States went after the CEO of Parler, and they honed in on him, and to the point where he had to go into hiding with his family. They were going after him so much. We see this tactic played out when we saw LeBron James target the officer from Columbus, Ohio, and post his picture, dox him, and put a hourglass next to him and say, "You're next." All right. We've seen this tactic played out in how they're isolating people from January 6, 2021 in Washington, D.C. and saying, we're going after you for just being there. Right? We see this play out as Antifa and Black Bloc and Black Lives Matter, a Marxist organization, just like Antifa. And others are going after individuals. I've got a friend here in Minnesota who has been so overwhelmingly and powerfully targeted by Marxist radical left in southern Minnesota that he lost his job. They threatened to burn down his home. They've threatened to go after his children. He's been there was one gentleman, and you know what, he was not a gentleman. There was an individual who went after my friend and said, got to be careful. You might catch a bullet in the head. So now, is that a threat? Sure, it's a threat. Now, proving that in a court of law can be very difficult, but that's what they do. They target and they isolate. And one of their greatest tactics right now when it comes to this targeting and this isolating of people is to go after them at their employer. So let's say you are a traditional conservative constitutionalist republic-loving individual. You dare to fly things like the Gadsden flag, or maybe you fly the American flag in its distressed position on your front porch or on your flagpole, or whatever the situation may be. Maybe you speak out against the governor's executive orders in your state. Maybe you speak out against your mayor's intrusive and unconstitutional measures in your own town. So consider like the city of Decorah, Iowa. The governor of Iowa has lifted the mask mandate statewide and has pretty much said, no, you don't get to enforce this. But yet the mayor and the governing body of Decorah has continued to institute a mask mandate, despite the governor saying that we're not going to be doing this in Iowa. So you look at all of these things and you watch, and then they go after individuals, right? And so they dox you. That's their big thing. They call it doxing, but that's just that last rule of Alinsky. You isolate, target, and cut off individuals, and you cut them off from support. There are people in public service all over the United States right now who have taken positions that people don't like. Consider the officer from Idaho who did a response video, to a comedic response video to LeBron James. And he was isolated and cut off from his support. They're threatening his livelihood. This is a Marxist tactic, and this is what they do. And they'll bring it to bear on anybody, on everyone. They cut you off from the people that you work with. They make you seem like you're the enemy. They make you seem like you're some sort of radical insurgent. They threaten you. They try to draw the FBI in. I have friends all over the United States who have had phone calls from the FBI who had said to them, "Oh, well, aren't you affiliated with such and such? Aren't you affiliated with so and so? What did you say about this? What did you mean by that?" And it kind of reeks of the old tactic that McCarthy used: have you now or have you ever been a member of? And it's meant to isolate you. It's meant to put you on the defensive. It's meant to cut you off from your support network, from your friends, from your family. Individuals here in the state of Minnesota have had flyers made about them and plastered for literally for a 3-block radius on every single telephone pole and street sign pole and light pole around their community, saying these people are members of such and such an organization. These people are white nationalists. These people are members of the KKK. These people are members of alt-right groups, none of which is true, but they isolate them from their neighborhood. They tell people to look for them and to report them for being members of terrorist or criminal organizations. And then they begin to contact their employers. And they put pressure on their employers. And their employers get so much pressure that either the people are put out, like just outright terminated, because in the state of Minnesota, for the most part, it's an at-will state, or they get you so isolated even from your employer that they end up removing you from your position, whatever the case might be. And what's that for? Wrongthink. It's all for wrongthink. These are tactics, and these aren't accidental, and these didn't just spring up overnight. This is what Saul Alinsky taught his acolytes and his disciples. And even though he's now dead, they have continued to be taught to the Marxist left throughout the United States higher education system, and it's bleeding down into the government schools. It bleeds down into the government schools. Like there are kids now who have tried to start pro-Republican Party clubs in their schools, and when they bring it up or talk about it in the government school, they're targeted, they're reported, they're cut off, they're isolated. Horrible things are said about them. Oh, well, so-and-so is a racist. So-and-so supports Trump. So-and-so is this. And they report that to the school administration, superintendents, to the principals, whatnot. And those kids are hauled into school offices and questioned for their affiliations and told, we can't have you spreading your hateful message. So this is deeper than just this, what people are calling this new cancel culture. This is a targeted attack on individual liberties, and it's meant to strip people of their freedom, their liberty to speak their mind, to stand up on the First Amendment, to assemble with who they will choose to assemble with, right or wrong. You have a freedom of assembly in the United States. You have a freedom to speak your mind, to redress your government for grievances, to protest and to rally peacefully, non-violently, and they will target you for that. And they know that the pressure that they bring on employers, that they bring on social organizations, on your neighborhood and on your community can isolate you. And so you watch these people who are removed from their positions, set out, like this, this officer out in Idaho, placed on paid suspension. Now, yeah, great, he's on paid suspension, but he's cut off from everybody that he works with. Now, does everybody that he works with kind of know what's going on? And so maybe they're going to be a little bit more supportive. Sure. But what about those voices out there and all the different public employee services, all those different conservative, traditionalist, constitutional voices where these people are just they receive a complaint about them and they're set off into the dark corners in the recesses of nowhere, and people are told this individual is persona non grata. Because that's what happens in many of these cases. There's no explanation. It's just this person is no longer allowed to work until further notice. And people will wonder, well, what the hell did they do? What's going on? Or what about the cases of private sector employees who are just summarily fired? Just fired. Called into the office and we've got enough complaints about you. You're causing an embarrassment to our to our business. You got to go. Nobody knows. This person is just escorted off the site, off the premises, and they're gone. And people are left to speculate. What did they steal? Who did they harass? What did they do? See, we can't let these tactics be brought to bear on us unanswered. We have to call them out for what they are. And if you happen to know someone who's in that position, you need to ask questions. If you know their ethics, if you know their reliability, if you know that they're not the kind of person that maybe the media or others are trying to paint them out to be, then make sure that you're staying in touch with them. Don't let them be isolated. I feel like really bad. Like, I think it was North Carolina, this detective who was fired from his job because he made a mistake. He accidentally linked his personal email or his work email to a donation that he made to Kyle Rittenhouse, to Kyle Rittenhouse's defense fund, legal defense fund. And he had a freedom to say what he said. He had the liberty, according to the First Amendment, to say what he said as a private citizen. And leftist Marxist agitators hacked into the platform, got the emails of private donations and anonymous donations, traced them back to their employers, to these people's employers, and reported them. This wasn't like this individual posted his work email personally and said, as a representative of such and such law enforcement agency, I am telling you that this law enforcement agency supports you, Kyle Rittenhouse, and everybody here does. He didn't do that. He posted it anonymously. He, in a poor decision, somehow used his or linked his work email to that donation. And then through an illegal hacking scheme, it was exposed, and now he's been fired. Summarily, let's just say summarily executed from his work. Cut off from all of his support, cut off from his friends, painted out to be a radical. And his employer basically implied that what he did was wrong and unethical and immoral in chastising him publicly in front of media, in the media, chastising him publicly and saying, we will not tolerate this kind of behavior. What? The kind of behavior that says that Kyle Rittenhouse is innocent until proven guilty and has a right to his day in court, and he has a right to a defense, and people have a right to donate to his defense and to defend him. That's what these tactics do. That's what they do. If they can't get you fired outright, then they'll report you to your employer. If we can figure out where you work, we're coming after you, and we're going to isolate you. We're going to ostracize you. We're going to cut you off from your support because, as Alinsky's last rule says, individuals hurt easier than institutions. It's easier to silence an individual than it is to silence an institution. Imagine trying to silence Google or YouTube or Facebook or Twitter right now. You can't isolate them. You can't withdraw their support, but they can certainly isolate you. Your employer can fire you if you're in an at-will state. If you're a public sector employee, you can be isolated for taking the wrong positions, and you can be told to be quiet. You can be told to not say anything. You can be told stop, and that's what's happening. Just saw another TikTok video the other day. The officer was told, you will take, and I wish I could remember who it was, but he was told, you will take this down. And he said, I'm not going to take this down. And they fired him for failing to obey a direct order from a superior. As a private citizen. This has to stop. And the only way it stops my fellow patriotic constitutionalist Americans, is if you begin to stand up for these people, if you begin to stand up and demand justice, not social justice, not racial justice, not cultural justice, but just justice. Stand up and begin to demand justice. When you become aware of people who are being isolated, targeted, and cut off from their support because they're easier to hurt when they're alone, the last thing in the world that you should be doing is isolating them and cutting them off from their support. If they've done something egregiously criminal, they should have their day in court. But if the only thing they have done has been guilty of cultural wrongthink, then nobody has a right or the authority to silence them and cut them off and deprive them of their living and their pursuit of happiness. So I look forward to the rest of this series. It's probably going to be a little bit longer than any of the others that I've done. And I look forward to feedback. And if you haven't divested yourself, or excuse me, invested of your time into reading or listening to Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, I would strongly recommend that you do so. You need to know your enemy. And they are your enemy. They're your political, ideological, cultural enemies. And they use these tactics constantly. But for those of you who choose not to, I will be continuing this series, and I look forward to your feedback, and I look forward to you sharing this everywhere that you can. And as I always end all of my videos with, thus always to tyrants, I'm going to continue to do that, because our tyrants are not shrinking, they're growing, and they're gaining strength, and they are gaining confidence, because they seem to be winning on every front. But we're not going to let that happen, are we? So until next time, sic semper tyrannis.